This is a question for those of you who are plaintiffs in this federal lawsuit that's been filed that was discussed regarding the Equality Act. And the question is, these are several questions, but we can just field them as needed. When was the lawsuit filed? When is the Equality Act going before the House and the Senate? It's passed through the House, I can say that. And it has not passed the Senate. A basic question about what the Equality Act is, H.R. 5, and then why weren't people of other faiths included in the lawsuit as plaintiffs? Wouldn't that prove that it's more than just a Christian cause?
You want to answer?
Daren?
All right. Well, it was filed, I think, a month ago.
Let me say, don't hold it at the bottom.
Okay.
That's what cuts it out.
Sure. It was filed a month ago, and the judge has accepted it, and so it will be heard. I would have to punt the question, the ending of that, to the lawyer that you saw the video with, Chris. It was his choice. He went and collected the five of us. And so, yeah, as to why it ended up being a Christian cause, I think because all of us are Christians. Don't know what else to say to that.
Yeah,
Stephen?
And I would say the reason why the people are in the lawsuit is because they were willing to do it. And there were others that could have, but refused to.
Okay, very good. Okay, I'm going to go to this one. How can I make a real difference in my local community? Standing against the onslaught of attacks seems impossible, but I refuse to just sit back and wait. I've heard a lot of this from Christians I've talked to. I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. What would be some of your suggestions, anybody?
Get involved in school boards. Whoops. Get involved with your school boards. Start to investigate what's going on at your local schools would be one suggestion. You can very easily call your Senate and House representatives as well with any of the bills that you hear or discover. Call them and find out what might be upcoming, just to let them hear your voice. I remember one time, Janet, when I had called, and it was in California. I don't live in California. But I just wanted to offer my support because of where this representative was coming from. Sometimes they just need to hear our support when they're on our side. I believe that encourages them.
I would also get invested in your local libraries, because the National Library Association is dramatically left and progressive and actually promotes the transgender story hour concept throughout its organizations and state chapters. And if you know what your library is doing, if you want your children to use the library, a lot of you may just say, heck, we'll just do stuff from home, but the library is going to be a place where things are going to happen unless you step in preemptively and indicate that that's not something that you want to have happen in your jurisdiction.
And a comment too, along with the library thing, that it's not just a question of the drag queen story hours at the library. It's also a question of some of these gay-affirming and trans-affirming books that are being put in the children's sections of these libraries, very specifically put there. And AFA is in the middle of putting together a mini documentary about a man in Jonesboro, Arkansas, who's dealing with this very issue in his library. He's a godly man on the library board, and he's been raising this issue, and it's caused a ton of controversy, obviously, because the rest of the board of the library is not very willing to go along with it. And he's just asking that the books not even be taken out of the library, but just moved to the adult section or somewhere else, because these books actually include very graphic visual material in them that is harmful for children. And so to even be aware of what's happening with just the presentation of the books at the library is worth checking out.
That's a great point. Dr. Van Meter, this one is for you. Are attorneys general aware of the truth about what you've taught in your last presentation? How about Oklahoma Attorney General John O'Connor?
I don't know about the state's Attorney General. I have been in conversation with Alabama and Florida Attorneys General, and Texas as well. And so I think it's just a matter of those folks who are like-minded. The AGs are going to talk with each other and spread as much of the truth. I went to Texas to do a presentation at their Texas Family Policy program I believe it was in February. And we had a wonderful time sort of dialoguing between Texas and I think Arkansas AGs. And so all these folks are like-minded, and I think we're going to see a surge and, again, cross-pollination of ideas as well.
That's fantastic. Ken Paxton. Yes, wonderful. He's great. Okay, let's go to a different type of question. Here's a question for the panel. Should a youth group allow gay and trans kids to come to camp or be a part of a group without any call to repent or tell them the truth under the banner of we just want to love them? In other words, how should Christian camps, for example, or youth groups handle ministry to homosexual or transgender children? That's a tough one.
Well, I would say, first of all, the church has to have policies in place. The development of the youth group, there is a foundation by which you're communicating the truth and how you're going to do ministry, not just to the LGBTQ, but the idea of human sexuality and God's divine intent. Those policies have to be in place. And then, no, you cannot invite people to come in to a youth group to be a participant of practicing sin going on a camping thing with other children who we're supposed to be protecting in the youth group. Any other comments?
In a non-faith-based camp situation, having a transgender child, because of the rule of three, you have to essentially accompany that special person with two adults everywhere they go from sunup to sundown in order not to be accused of any kind of potential abuse. So it takes the camp setting where normally the camper's in a cabin. In our diabetic camps, there are 8 campers per cabin and 3 counselors. That takes that child out of that cabin, accompanied by 2 adults, to use a different restroom than the open restrooms and it basically completely discombobulates the entire camp experience for that child. So it's difficult for the campers themselves who are not transgender to understand, and on top of that, it ruins the camp experience for the child. So it's a quandary that they're trying to develop what to do, and there's not a solution for it that we've come up with.
Yeah, I had a friend who kids went to a camp, and the camp counselors had to give the disclaimer about how they're going to treat the transgender children. And he was really upset because he said, I didn't send my kids to go to this camp to learn about transgenderism, and it was forced upon all the other kids. And so it's something to consider that if you are going to bring somebody there, how's that going to impact everybody else? And are you notifying all of the parents? And then personally, I would ask, is a camp an evangelistic outreach, or is it a discipleship program? And the church has to decide what that camp is going to be, the purpose of that.
Right, that's a growing problem, because you're right, and that happens in Christian schools as well. They want to minister to kids who aren't necessarily from Christian families and may have some sexual confusion, but at the same time, then the Christian parents are saying, well, hang on a second, this can get a little complicated. And I know that's becoming more and more of an issue.
And it should be that the parents have clear understanding of what those are going to be to decide whether they want their children to participate or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I have a question for Dr. Van Meter that came up when I was listening to you. I have the experience, this kind of goes on my own experience a little bit, but I had taken one of my children to a new pediatrician a couple of years ago, and very prominently there was a sign posted inside the exam room that said, "We do not discriminate according to gender identity or sexual orientation." And I got very angry when I saw that, because what that communicates to me, and I'm sure to everybody on this panel, is you care about politics more than you care about biology. How in the world can I trust you as a trained medical professional who's supposed to understand biology if you're putting your politics above that? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the growing distrust that might be created between parents who have their heads on straight and doctors who are playing politics with all of this trans ideology.
Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics published an article by Dr. Michael Levine, who is actually on the faculty at Morehouse in Atlanta, and it basically said that every pediatric office needed to be LGBT oriented and friendly. You had to take down any reference to girls' restrooms or boys' restrooms. You had to have, you had to openly have your pronouns around a lanyard around your neck so that the patients would feel comfortable when they came in. And guidelines that said, what is this about? I mean, how this is an ideology that you're basically taking a neutral environment which has no claims to discriminate against anybody, and you're now creating classes of individuals and it discriminates against the folks who may not believe in that. We did a hearing with HHS on the Biden administration's 1557 modification of the Affordable Care Act, where they were essentially preparing to mandate that all medical practitioners who did hormone therapy or surgery for any patient were going to be mandated to do so for transgender patients or be under fine or incarceration and closing of practice and loss of licensure. And that's the guidelines that Dr. Rachel Levine has oversight and created. And so when we were on this Zoom call, you knew who you were talking to because all of the HHS people had their pronouns behind their name. And I just think, oh my God, what a sad world we live in, that you have to put pronouns to show your political stripes. The politics should be absolutely gone. There should be no presence of politics in anything we do. So that if I have a family that comes in and this is a family I know that's lobbied for abortion rights, I don't treat their child any differently because of that, because I have a different opinion on the politics of the issue, let alone the moral issue. So it just creates a friction that does not need to be there.
Wow, that's something.
Yeah, well, similar to Janet's question, I know of two cases. One is a young man, probably at the time, maybe a young teen, was asked by his pediatrician, do you like girls or boys? And I wonder if that is something that's being driven by the politics, to show how politically correct. And the other one was a situation we heard of a mother who learned that her daughter had been asked by the pediatrician. The pediatrician actually volunteered to give her cell phone number to the daughter, and she was asking questions about gender. Do you know what gender you are? And the mother found out, and she was irate that she was going to push this in secret almost. Is this something that's being encouraged, or is this just a fluke?
The Society of Adolescent Medicine was established sometime in the time when I was a resident in pediatrics, and its goal was to separate adolescents from their parents, to make sure that the adolescents had confidentiality, and they went through state by state and got laws passed that allowed emancipated minors to deal with their physicians without knowledge of their parents. And that spread subsequently to the point where when I sent my kids to college, I had to make payments for tuition, but I could not see their transcripts of their grades or know anything about it. And it's a wedge in the family. We can make opinions about where we think this comes from, but the purpose of it is to make sure that the adolescent gets what they want and that the parents have very little input. And so this is the kind of wedge that gets driven in. Talk to the kid in private about their sexual preferences when they're coming in for their 11 or 12-year-old checkup. And it's like, really? I mean, honestly, that's something that we want to do. I leave the parents in the room, and I have a curtain that separates the vision of where the parent sits and where the child is on the exam table, so that I can do the exam while the parent is in the room acting as my chaperone. And it's a very effective way. And if the mother or father may sometimes say, hey, I'm going to leave the room if he has any questions for you. That's the way it should go. The parent should relinquish that and say, I want my child to speak freely about things, but not the other way around where the pediatrician instigates that. But that's the thrust of where medicine is going.
Dr. Van Meter, just as a follow-up, how do you explain, this is the way I should phrase it, how do you explain some of the causes of what is now called gender dysphoria? In other words, for example, Peter, you'll remember there's a man by the name of James Shoup who was online for a while. I think he's kind of gone out of sight for a while, but he was the first person to openly be declared non-binary in the state of Oregon, and then you may know who he is, and he subsequently rejected that, and he was talking about, for example, the condition of autogynephilia, which is a man who feels sexual pleasure by dressing up as a woman and these sorts of things. What should we understand about some of the causes of what's behind someone who would come into a transgender clinic and say, I was born in the wrong body? What are some of the different disorders that might be contributing to that, or social disorders?
Well, I listened to a wonderful presentation by James Cantor. He's the psychologist from Toronto who I mentioned before. He said that the concept of transgender as one homogeneous group of individuals is completely off the tracks. Little children are different than the adolescents, who are different than the adults in their adult life. Vastly different backgrounds of why things should happen. What we know in children, and particularly the youngsters, in the history, is that there have been adverse childhood events that these kids have had to go through. And an adverse childhood event can be something as simple as divorce of parents, which is the most common thing that we see. It can be death of a sibling, death of a parent, a grandparent, a death of a pet. It can be frequent moves, okay, in a military family, where the kid has friends for 9 months and whoop, all of a sudden moves from Kansas to Virginia, from Virginia to Washington State for Puerto Rico, and back and forth. Never ever gets to establish friendships. That's an adverse childhood event. Sexual abuse is one of the most common adverse child events in these kids. And if you don't ask the questions, if you leave the dark, scary things in the basement, and what you do is you put a wall up or a bookcase over the door and pretend the basement doesn't exist, you're basically burying the causes of this unsettled concept. This child lives in fear and a horrible sense of, I can't trust anybody, I don't know what is right and what is wrong. And if you don't get into that issue, and you don't find those things out by avoiding, maybe interviewing the kid and say, how long have you felt you were in the wrong body? Oh, I had one, this just drove me crazy. In Alabama, there was a 13-year-old biologic female who was all neatly dressed with a bow tie and a suit, very nattily dressed, and claimed to be a boy, and said that he said he knew that he was a boy when he was 18 months of age, and that he tried to kill himself when he was that age. And the legislative group just said, oh my gosh, what a sad, sad story. A toddler who tried to commit suicide. Are you kidding? I mean, and I had to listen to this and say, oh my God, people, just this is imagination gone crazy. And yet those are the kinds of things that you will hear in the anecdotal testimonies, that I knew from this early age. And I had the sad case in Ohio where the girl, age 17, was essentially suing her parents, as was Hamilton County DFAC Services, because they wouldn't give her testosterone when she wanted it. She was well into puberty and menstruating already. And so here she is, 2 months away from her 18th birthday, and the court awards custody to the maternal grandparents who said that they would go along with the therapy. That girl wrote letters that she had believed that she was, and I mean, at her age 8 and 9, she's writing notes to herself in her diary. I'm born in the wrong body. I'm born in the wrong body, and the parents just couldn't. They did everything in their power to bring their faith to kind of into her life and explain things. She falsely claimed that they had duct taped her to a chair and made her say prayers. Which did not happen, as she admitted later. So the court awards this kid to the grandparents. She starts on testosterone therapy. Within 18 months, she was already desisting and wanting her biologic male name back on her ID. And that through the family, and the family is not healed. The family is torn asunder. So this is something that this girl actually claimed back to her prepubertal age, that she believed this, and in a period of 18 months of being on her therapies realized, oops, that wasn't it after all. So you cannot really, you need a valid, very deep, very broad evaluation of these kids, every one of their siblings, every one of their step siblings, every one of their half siblings, their parents divorced, each side, step parents, aunties and uncles that may live in the environment. You need to know everybody's relationship with this child. And when you do that kind of evaluation, you find that in the basement is a dead, rotten animal that's been festering down there, and all that needs to be done is to go down there, clean that out, open the windows, turn on the lights, and life is good.
Wow.
Yeah, I wanted to say about this when and you know this as a medical doctor, the brain is in development until age 25. The solidifying of even direction of life doesn't really get a very decisive direction until that time. I mean, most of us can remember going out of high school and into college and all the different changes that take place. And so this is such a tragic misservice in loving people at a very common sense level. Wouldn't you say, Doctor?
If you go to the American College of Pediatricians website, which is acpeds.org, there's a paper in there called the Teenage Brain Under Development. And it's just, a new version has just been revised and updated with some references. It just explains everything that you ever couldn't understand about your adolescent, why decisions are made and why craziness happens. And you just think about the faith life of kids who get brought up into a family and they're imbued with their parents' thoughts and beliefs in religion, and they get out and they go to college and they just kind of wander off. And then in adulthood, they find themselves again. Sometimes it's when they get married and have children and they come back to their faith. It's because their brain finally figured it out and they realize all the things that were embedded in them make sense and that should guide their lives.
Well said.
That's great. Yes, Peter.
And Denise, which is, we hear a lot about the suicide. The kids are using the suicide threat against the parents. Everybody panics. I know there was a case in Chicago of a 16-year-old girl who had her healthy breasts surgically removed, and the news reporter interviewed the parents. Somebody in the story said it was a suicide threat. So how are these regarded, and how do you deal with it?
Well, the suicide threat is the hammer that bullies the parents. And they're actually encouraged online. There was a doctor in Toronto who basically said, if you want to get your transgender going fast, please say that you're going to kill yourself. And that's the avenue to get everything rolling really fast. Dr. Fox, that was his name. And he was online. You all can go see it. And these kids, they live online. I mean, they live online. They get their news, their life, their communications, not outside the home. They shun their parents, close all that off, put their earbuds in, and live looking at a screen. And so they are told to use this threat. And the actual statistics from the Williams Institute, which is not known to be in any way anti-LGBT, matter of fact, they're very pro-rights of them, they publish the data that children who are depressed and anxious as a baseline commit suicide about 25%, or have suicidality about 23% of the time. Autistic children across the spectrum, suicide about 21% of the time, talking about, not completing suicide. Transgender, 23%, 22%. And so it's the same. It's not 41% or 100%. What do you want, a dead son or a trans girl? That is a hammer that is brought out, and that's what scares the snot out of everybody in the state legislators. And every family court judge just listens to that and says, let him go, let her go. We don't want a dead patient on our hands, And so it plays that card over and over again. It is vile, it is evil, and totally untrue. And yet Dr. Levine said, we're saving these kids' lives, otherwise they'll kill themselves. As if 100% of somebody who's not trans, who is counseled, 100% will kill themselves. Well, wait a minute. 90 to 100% of them got through that and went back to their prescribed biologic sex and gender being on the same side of the fence. So that's not 100% death. That's 90% success rate. I mean, what an incredible lie.
You're so right. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit so we get to hear from some of you, and I'm sure we'll return to this in just a moment. But in talking about LGBTQ plus tyranny, which has been what we've been addressing this weekend, Denise, I know you had mentioned the issues with your Facebook pages, for example, in the area of censorship. where social media sites may censor Facebook. Peter, I know you had your website attacked, and a lot of us have stories about LGBT activists of all stripes coming after us, whether it's social media or websites or what have you. I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about some of your experiences with censorship and how you get around that, or any sort of thoughts you have on how Christians should respond in an age where Google and Facebook and Twitter, maybe not so much under Elon now, but some of the other sites online who don't want us to get the truth out about this issue, how do you get around it? How do you deal with it?
Well, for American Family Association, one of the things that we decided to do was to start our own streaming platform. afa.streaming.net, I think, or streaming.afa.net, one of those is the actual website. But anyway, it's a platform for our own content. And part of the reason that this came up is because when we released In His Image, one of our typical platforms we would go to would be Amazon Prime. And we had the earlier project on biblical authority, the God Who Speaks. That one was successfully submitted to Amazon Prime. I think you can still watch it there. But when we tried to submit In His Image, it wasn't accepted. Of course, there's no real recourse and there's no explanation. But, you know, we don't have to read the tea leaves too hard to understand what was going on there. So one of the things that, I mean, obviously AFA is in a unique position to be able to build and support a platform like that. But, you know, that is one thing, that there are Christian alternatives. So to either support Christian alternatives to this or to build your own Christian alternative.
I know that we had a MeWe account. There's so many different platforms out there that it almost scatters even our friends, our colleagues. But I began to use that more. So if I post anything on Facebook, it's going on MeWe. So now, as far as the audience that may be going over to MeWe, that knows that we're there, it's just as active as the Facebook. We can kind of do this dance for as long as we can. You know, if something happens where that particular platform goes away, then where can we find another one? I think it's just important that we don't give up. You know, God has given us a directive, all of us here, in the work that we do. And if we give up, where are people to know the truth, as the doc here is offering? Where are the testimonies, the ministering of the heart and the soul? So we have to keep going forward, find platforms, do what you can. Like you said, you know, you were able to go live streaming. I know that we're working on a project and we considered YouTube, but ultimately they'd end up shutting me down with this project. So we're actually looking at a different platform where we will have videos of it. Tumblr didn't work for us. Rumble, yeah, we did a Rumble test and that wasn't working, through our website. So it's just navigating the busyness of trying to keep yourself out there and what will work and what won't. But I just think it's important that we just keep moving forward. And I just want to piggyback on your question just briefly. I think no doubt most families or individuals, that the children or people have been hurt, have been wounded. We have to remember there's a lot of peer pressure out there for our kids to identify somewhere in the LGBT and how they are celebrated. If they are looking to be affirmed in some way, they're feeling empty, they're going to be received very well and become celebrated, especially if they're identifying as transgender. But we also have to remember that there's psychological reasons that sometimes are underlining as well: obsessive compulsive disorder, you have personality disorder, and autism, you know, which we all know is another scope of this. So there are some other psychological issues, and perhaps the number one, you know, to have your child seen by somebody that's safe, to possibly diagnose to see if there's something there. But I totally agree with you, because most of them are just hurting from something, and a lot of times the parents don't have a clue of what had happened to their child.
A lot of times the parents may be part of the problem, okay? I mean, if one of the parents sexually abused their child and this parent is just guilt-ridden from this, are they really going to say, I know why my child wants to be transgender, I raped her when she was... No, it's not going to happen. So, you know, there are some dark secrets that you just have to have a really phenomenal therapist go in and get all the doors and windows open so you can see what's really going on. So that's just, and it's not always that it's something somber and awful like that, but parents bear the guilt. I mean, everything my adult children grew up to be, all the bad things I take credit for, because that's what we do as parents. Think, gosh, I wish, if I hadn't done this that particular time, if I hadn't argued with them, maybe it wouldn't have gone this particular way, and my son would have taken a different job pathway, and you never know. We always bear those worries as parents because we love our kids and we feel responsible for what they become, and we are overjoyed with what they become as well.
I was going to say on the censorship, a lot of these gay activists and these trans activists are very tech savvy. There's I think the Joe Dallas case, or I don't know who they censored, but it was a kid in England or Canada who basically he found out how to get to the bank, because they've got to solve the bank thing, because if they can, he found a way to harass, to threaten his bank funding, and a similar thing happened to us. We had this punk. I'm not even going to say where he's from because I don't want to encourage him, but he did the same thing. He was very savvy about it, very quick, and he would send these threatening letters. And this is when we reported something truthful. And I also had a guy post something that said, "Snipers take note." He thought there was a park across from my house in Illinois. Turns out it was a school. We busted him. We called the FBI on him. And he got a misdemeanor charge. And I'm very vigilant. If somebody I've had homosexual activists send porn through the text, which is illegal. So we've got prosecution going on now. The guys, but they have to get the phone records. Because one thing I learned about this harassment is, if you don't, it's a tough thing. You can just ignore it, but the way it works with these guys, they're like bullies, and sometimes they're trying to create for example, I had Wayne Besson, who's a vicious homosexual activist, who's at war with the ex-gays. He hates Stephen Black, and he basically tries to say that nobody can change. So he nicknamed me Porno Pete because we expose a lot of the perversion that's out there. And I just let it go, and it engendered more, and I probably would have been better off writing an article that got the links, this is why this is a lie. But they really are very good at cyberbullying. Dan Savage, the guy who did Santorum.com, which was named after Rick Santorum, Senator Rick Santorum, remember him? Because Rick Santorum had said something critical about, I think he defended Lawrence v. Texas. It was something about sodomy. So Dan Savage self-righteously creates a website using Santorum's name, and then he has the definition of Santorum, which ironically was linked to some disgusting byproduct of anal sex. That was the definition. But we tried, we said, "You're a cyberbully. You are a cyberbully, Dan Savage. You spend your life telling everybody he's a hater, and yet you do something like this, and you think that is justified because they're operating from a pure position of self-righteousness. And anything they do is always fighting haters and bigots. So basically it's a carte blanche to do anything they want, because they're fighting the haters."
Right. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, as far as censorship goes, in 2019, a gay activist came after Amazon and had said, Amazon, you need to remove all these books. And they hadn't read the book, but they went on to change.org, got 89,000 signatures, and off goes a bunch of books. All of Nicolosi's books and Ann Polk's books, Joe Dallas, which are discipleship books.
Which they didn't read.
Yeah, no, they didn't read these books, and these are Christian discipleship books, therapy books, and Amazon just wipes them off. And what was really interesting, one of the books, I was calling the authors of these books, and I talked to the guy, and he was on the Supreme Court bar. And I said, "Hey, would you get involved? That's a really good position. You could help us out here." And he ended up writing a letter to Amazon because his book was given as a testimony against Oberfeld, amicus brief. And so Amazon, he said, "You better put my book back or you're going to have a Supreme Court lawsuit on your hands." And so he got his book back, but all of our books still remain off of Amazon, and continually there. You remember Ryan T. Anderson?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, his book got taken off of Amazon for a short time.
And Abigail Schreier as well.
Abigail's book, and Voice of the Voiceless, we put a petition out on change.org to say, hey, here's alternative views on homosexuality. This is, let's not do Fahrenheit 451 and start burning books. We need to have both sides of the conversation. And I wrote an article, what are ex-gays and why do their books matter? And we could only get 20,000 signatures. And mind you, change.org is one of the leftist organizations, so they probably blackballed our petition. But the censorship is real. And Denise, when she got her website taken off from that report, there's actually a dozen other organizations that had their Facebook wiped off that week. And when a LGBT activist says something, the organizations, these leftist organizations will jump immediately. And they'll say, oh, well, they told Denise, oh, well, that was a mistake. Only because Brandon over at Christian Post had written about it, and it started getting some momentum and pushback. But, Ryan, when he was talking about his book, I'm like, come on, Ryan, mention us. Talk about 2019. And he got as far as saying, well, if we think about censoring my book, well, they're going to censor other people's books too, like they did before. And, we are the little guys in a sense that we're a canary in the mine of censorship. Our testimonies of being transformed by Jesus, well, why can't we share our testimonies? Vimeo took off all of David Kyle Foster's Pure Passion Media.
And our God's Voice videos.
And the God Voice videos.
Yes,
and
we went through that.
Jim Doman in California, he has Church United, and he was a big part of AB 2943, which is the conversion therapy ban pushback in 2018. Well, he had just sued Vimeo because they took his ex-gay testimony off. And carte blanche, what I think the reason, well, I don't know, maybe Voice of the Voiceless, when everybody else got their websites taken off, we didn't land on the report. And so I don't know, because the narrative that I've been saying is that this is a 1964 civil rights violation. And I've gone to 19 different lawyers to try to find somebody to sue, and to sue these tech companies. And Jim did it. Jim sued Vimeo. But when we go to get help with censorship, 19 lawyers said, yeah, you have precedent. That's probably legally you guys are in the right. But they say, well, we can't sue because of our insurance. And they said that I can sue them for not doing their job. I can't remember what that's called. Anybody?
Dereliction of duty?
No,
Or
it's
something along those lines?
wrongful outcome or whatever. Yeah, it's kind of like derelict of duty. And they said, well, we're all under the consensus that we won't take your case because it hasn't been done before. Who has been sued? What big tech company has been sued for civil rights violations? Because they'll allow people that go from Christianity and leave Christianity, or go from heterosexuality to homosexuality. You can have those books on Amazon. But if you leave the LGBT religion and follow Jesus and are transformed and you give testimony to Jesus, well, that message is carved out and said you can't do that. Well, to me, that's a civil rights violation, like saying, okay, well, we have a business, but we don't want black people to come here. We'll give you a separate sink or restaurant. And to me, it's a violation. I mean, they're doing it as far as they can go culturally, and they had to put Denise's website back because it was just too much pushback. But they'll just keep pushing until they can get us off the websites and media.
This is exactly why I've been saying for the last several years, Peter, you and I, and Stephen, you and I have been talking about this. I've been saying this for several years. Stockpile your physical books on any subject that you anticipate might get you kicked off someplace like Amazon. Or you publish a book, you can get it published, but then you can't buy it anywhere. I'm telling you, and especially as you see these digital forms of books, becoming so popular, a lot more Christians in the last few years that I've heard have been talking about how do we know that those things can't be changed. And these are becoming real issues. It's very bizarre and very jarring, I think, for a lot of us to say, wow, is it really coming to that? But as we're winding up here, we only have about a minute or two left, but just want to give all of you an option for a final comment.
I just say we have to be continuously diligent to back everything up, to not allow any of the digital, the video, everything that we are doing at First Stone is backed up and away from all of the other platforms. So we need to make sure that we do that.
And I'd say in terms of the healthcare industry, the physicians that care for your children, explain to them how concerned you are about and how you feel about this, and suggest that they might want to go to the AACP's website and look at what we stand for, which is, scientifically based, no harm to children kind of therapies, and that's what we stand for, as opposed to hate and bigotry.
I would encourage everybody. I had when you talk about Wayne, he was at the Freedom March last year, and he doesn't know me by face. He knows me by position, and so I was able to go over there and actually interview him and interview the people that they were creating their videos against Freedom March and against the ex-gay community. So I watched them film these things, and I started interviewing them, and one of the comments that they made is, "Man, you're really nice." And they said, "You're not like everybody else. You ask questions." And I was interviewing them. And, one of the things that I want to encourage you guys is that we're not against the LGBT. Someone had said, Ephesians 6:12, we're against an enemy that's trying to destroy mankind and the image of God. And we're trying to lift up the people who identify as LGBT. Their identity, the created purpose has been stolen by an enemy, and they've been bound to lies and to sin. And so when people say, "Oh, well, you people over there are demonizing the LGBT," I'm like, no, I'm lifting up, and their testimony is being demonized. When they say, "Oh, well, I was born this way and I'm meant for sodomy and that I can't change," they're the ones that are being demonized. They're believing doctrines of demons, as Scripture says in 2 Timothy. And so we're trying as Christians to bring the light to that, and that is the loving thing to do. When they say that, we're being hateful and bigotry, I'd say your doctrines are actually unbecoming. Love does no harm to their neighbor. Love is not unbecoming. And to say that, your life, the way that you're in the wrong body, like that's unbecoming of the creation that God made you for. And I'm trying to lift you up and glorify what God's done in your life. So I'd encourage you that that's a good thing.
I just would encourage anybody here that's a family member, somebody trying to understand, to go to valuable websites, as the doc here had referred to. It's very difficult. This type of conference can be very heavy when we're pouring into you information, but when you can, just to take a steady look at it so that you are well informed on the truth behind the issues, just as the doctor's presentation here. But don't forget to take care of your own heart and soul. You need to take care of yourself, because this is a battle, and spiritually you get worn out. We're just human. We aren't Jesus Christ. So you've got to take care of yourself so that you are a healthy warrior for your loved one.
That's good, Denise. Christ gives us a paradigm for discernment. And in the parallel accounts in Mark 4:24, it says, "Be careful what you hear." In Luke chapter 8, it says, "Be careful how you hear." And I think both of those ideas are things that we as Christians need to be careful of. Be careful what you listen to, the things that you take in, the voices that you choose to lend authority to, but also be careful how you hear. Whatever that trusted voice is that you think that you can trust, always listen discerningly. Is it biblical? Where is it leading spiritually? Those kinds of questions.
Excellent. All of your answers quite excellent.